The silence of the night was shattered by the sound of gunshots echoing through the quiet residential streets, followed by a blood-curdling scream that would forever haunt the woman who heard it. What she didn't know in that terrifying moment was that she had just witnessed the final chapter of a promising young life. A life that had been dedicated to making the world a better place, now extinguished by two heartless predators who saw human beings as nothing more than opportunities for quick cash. Eve Carson had always been the kind of person who made everyone around her believe in the goodness of humanity. Born on a crisp November day in 1985 in Athens, Georgia, she entered the world with what seemed like an innate understanding that life was meant to be lived in service of others. From her earliest days, Eve possessed a drive that set her apart from her peers. Not the kind of ambition that seeks personal glory, but the rare determination to lift others up while climbing her own mountains. During her high school years, while most teenagers were focused on social media and weekend parties, Eve was orchestrating change. As vice president of a student council, she didn't just hold a title. She wielded it like a tool for transformation. Her weekends weren't spent at the mall or hanging out with friends, though she had plenty of those, but rather volunteering at nursing homes, where she would spend hours listening to elderly residents share their life stories, or at shelters for abused teenagers, where her warm smile and genuine empathy provided comfort to young people who had lost faith in the world. Her dedication didn't stop there. While balancing her demanding academic schedule, Eve worked as a congressional page, gaining firsthand insight into the political process that she hoped to one day influence for the better. But perhaps most remarkably, she also assisted in a stem cell research laboratory, contributing to cutting-edge medical research that could potentially save countless lives. All of this was accomplished while maintaining the kind of academic excellence that would make any parent beam with pride. When graduation day arrived, Eve didn't just walk across that stage. She glided, her honor cords and academic achievements a testament to years of relentless dedication. But for Eve, this wasn't an ending. It was merely the beginning of what she envisioned would be a lifetime of service to humanity. The University of North Carolina welcomed Eve with open arms, and she embraced her new environment with the same passion that had defined her high school years. Double majoring in political science and biology, she had crafted an academic path that would allow her to understand both the human condition and the scientific principles that could improve it. Her professors quickly recognized her exceptional capabilities, and she was awarded a prestigious scholarship that acknowledged not just her academic prowess, but her potential to make a significant impact on the world. Campus leadership roles seemed to find Eve naturally, or perhaps she sought them out with the understanding that with privilege comes responsibility. She didn't just participate in student organizations. She transformed them, bringing fresh perspectives and innovative solutions to age-old campus challenges. Her dorm mates would often find her hunched over textbooks late into the night, not just studying for her own classes, but preparing materials for the elementary school students she tutored in science. Eve's worldview was expansive in a way that many people never achieve, even after decades of life experience. During one memorable summer, she traveled to Ecuador, where she worked alongside doctors providing medical care to underserved communities. The experience of seeing healthcare disparities firsthand only strengthened her resolve to pursue a career that could address such inequalities on a systemic level. Her semester in Cuba provided her with a unique perspective on different political and economic systems, while her research work in Egypt connected her to the ancient roots of human civilization and scientific discovery. By any measure, Eve Carson was extraordinary. Her professors spoke of her in terms usually reserved for once-in-a-generation students. Her friends admired her not just for her achievements, but for her genuine kindness and her ability to make everyone feel valued and heard. She had the rare gift of being highly accomplished without ever making others feel diminished by comparison. As February 2008 arrived, Eve was 22 years old and standing on the precipice of what everyone knew would be a remarkable career. She had already secured a coveted job offer from a major company, a position that would allow her to begin implementing the changes she had been dreaming about since high school. Her final semester was proceeding smoothly, with graduation just months away and her future laid out before her like a red carpet. Eve had chosen to live off campus during her final year, sharing a house with a close-knit group of friends who had become like family to her. These weren't just roommates thrown together by circumstance, but people who genuinely cared for each other and created the kind of supportive environment that made the stress of senior year manageable. March 5th began like any other day. Eve attended her classes, participated in her usual campus activities, and returned home to her shared house as evening approached. As night fell, her roommates were preparing for a party, the kind of typical college social gathering that Eve usually enjoyed. They extended their usual invitation, expecting her to grab her jacket and join them for a night of dancing and laughter. But Eve had other plans that evening. With important exams approaching and her characteristic dedication to academic excellence, she made the decision that would unknowingly seal her fate. "I think I'll stay in tonight," she told her friends with a smile. "I really need to get caught up on my studying." Her roommates understood. They had seen Eve's work ethic throughout their time together, and they knew that when she committed to something, she followed through completely. Around 1:30 in the morning, as Eve sat surrounded by textbooks and notes, her fingers dancing across her laptop keyboard as she prepared for upcoming classes, her friends were heading out into the night. They called out their goodbyes, reminding her to text if she changed her mind about joining them later. The house fell quiet except for the soft clicking of computer keys and the occasional rustle of turning pages. For the next 2 hours, Eve continued her studying, completely absorbed in her academic work. Her computer records would later show that she was actively engaged with her coursework until approximately 3:30 in the morning, a testament to her dedication even in the final months of her college career. She had no way of knowing that outside in the darkness, 2 predators were prowling the streets, looking for someone vulnerable, someone alone, someone they could exploit for their own selfish gain. When Eve's roommates returned home around 4:30 in the morning, slightly tired from their night out and expecting to find the house quiet and dark, they were immediately struck by something wrong. The front door stood wide open, as if someone had left in a hurry and forgotten to close it behind them. All the lights were still blazing throughout the house, casting an eerie glow into the early morning darkness. "Eve," they called out, expecting to hear her voice respond from her bedroom, or perhaps find her asleep at her desk, surrounded by her study materials. But there was no answer. A quick search of the house revealed what they had begun to fear. Eve was nowhere to be found. Her car was missing from its usual parking spot, adding another layer of confusion to an already bewildering situation. The roommates tried calling her cell phone repeatedly, each unanswered ring increasing their anxiety. Why would Eve leave in the middle of the night? And why would she leave the door wide open and all the lights on? It wasn't like her to be so careless, and it certainly wasn't like her to disappear without telling anyone where she was going. Initially, they tried to convince themselves that there was a reasonable explanation. Perhaps a family emergency had required her to leave suddenly. Maybe she had received an urgent call and had been too distracted to properly secure the house. They spent the remaining hours before dawn hoping to hear the sound of her car pulling into the driveway, expecting her to walk through the door with an apologetic smile and a story about some unexpected crisis that had required her immediate attention. But as the sun rose and a new day began, Eve still hadn't returned. Her phone continued to go straight to voicemail, and there had been no word from her family or other friends. Finally, with growing dread, one of her roommates made the decision to contact the police and report her missing. The officer who took the report listened carefully to the details: the open door, the missing car, the complete absence of any explanation for Eve's disappearance. After gathering all the available information, he shared something that sent chills down the roommate's spine. Earlier that morning, around 5 a.m., police had discovered the body of a young woman in a location about a mile from Eve's house. The victim had not yet been identified, as she had been found without any identification or personal belongings. With trembling hands, the officer showed Eve's friend a photograph taken at the crime scene. The recognition was immediate and devastating. The promising young woman who had been preparing for her final exams just hours earlier was now lying in the morgue, her dreams and aspirations cut short by senseless violence. The details that emerged from the crime scene painted a horrifying picture. Around 5 a.m., a woman living in the area had been awakened by the unmistakable sound of gunshots, followed by a scream that she would later describe as the most terrifying sound she had ever heard. Alarmed and fearing for the safety of her neighborhood, she had immediately called the police. When officers arrived at the scene, they found Eve's body lying on the ground in what appeared to be a random location. Not near her home, not near any place she would have had reason to visit. She had been shot multiple times, and whoever had killed her had stripped away anything that might identify her, taking her wallet, her identification, her cell phone, and anything else of value. The medical examiner's report provided some small comfort in confirming that Eve had not been sexually assaulted, ruling out certain motives for the attack. However, this also made the crime more puzzling. If not for sexual violence, then why had someone targeted this young woman who was known for her kindness and had no known enemies? As detectives began reconstructing the timeline of events, a chilling picture emerged. At 1:30 a.m., Eve had been safely at home, surrounded by her textbooks and preparing for her future. By 5 a.m., her life had been brutally ended just a mile away from her house. The question that haunted investigators was both simple and complex. How had she ended up there, and who was responsible for this senseless act of violence? The discovery that Eve Carr was missing provided the first real clue about the nature of the crime. Investigators began operating under the theory that this had been a robbery gone wrong, that Eve had been targeted for her vehicle and whatever valuable she might have possessed. This theory gained credibility when a search of her bedroom revealed that her wallet and credit cards were missing, and these items were nowhere to be found near her body. Police immediately began tracking Eve's cell phone, hoping to trace her movements during those crucial hours between 1:30 and 5 a.m. The last signal from her phone had come from a cell tower near a highway just outside of town, but the device itself was never recovered. Investigators suspected that her killers had discarded it somewhere in the wooded areas surrounding the city, where it might never be found. The first major break in the case came when Eve's stolen car was discovered abandoned just a few miles from her home. The vehicle was immediately transported to the forensics laboratory, where technicians began the painstaking process of collecting fingerprints, DNA evidence, and any other traces that might lead them to her killers. Meanwhile, computer forensics experts made a crucial discovery while examining Eve's laptop. The computer showed activity until approximately 3:30 a.m., indicating that Eve had been alive and working on her studies for at least 2 hours after her roommates left for the party. This narrowed the window during which the attack had occurred and suggested that her killers had either been watching the house or had chosen their target randomly during the early morning hours. News of Eve's murder spread rapidly throughout the university community and the surrounding city. Students who had known her through her various campus involvements struggled to comprehend how someone so full of life and promise could be gone so suddenly and so violently. The campus, usually bustling with activity and youthful energy, took on a somber atmosphere as everyone tried to process the loss of someone who had touched so many lives. The fear that gripped the community was palpable. If someone like Eve, responsible, careful, and surrounded by friends, could become a victim of such random violence, then who was safe? Students began traveling in groups. Parents called to check on their children more frequently, and the carefree atmosphere that typically characterizes college life was replaced by a heightened awareness of vulnerability and mortality. Police were inundated with tips from concerned citizens who wanted to help solve the case. Every suspicious person, every unusual activity, every strange noise from the night of March 5th was reported in hopes that it might provide the crucial clue that would lead to Eve's killer. Unfortunately, despite the community's willingness to help, none of these initial tips brought investigators any closer to identifying the perpetrators. The breakthrough that investigators had been hoping for came through financial records. Since Eve's credit cards had been stolen along with her other belongings, police began monitoring her accounts for any unusual activity. What they discovered was both significant and disturbing. Just 18 minutes after Eve's computer showed its last activity, meaning just 18 minutes after she had stopped studying and presumably encountered her attackers. Someone began using her credit cards to withdraw money from ATMs around the city. The transactions showed a pattern of desperation and greed. 2 separate withdrawals totaling $700, followed by several more attempts to access her accounts that were blocked due to daily withdrawal limits. The ATM, where the successful transactions occurred, was located near a shopping center on the opposite side of town from Eve's home. When detectives requested the security footage from this location, they struck gold. The surveillance cameras had captured clear images of a man sitting in what appeared to be Eve's car, using her credit card to access her accounts. Even more chilling was what appeared to be a second person in the back seat of the vehicle. While the image quality made it impossible to definitively identify this individual, investigators suspected with growing horror that it might have been Eve herself, forced to accompany her attackers as they systematically drained her bank accounts before ultimately taking her life. Forensic experts worked tirelessly to enhance the surveillance footage, hoping to get clearer images of the perpetrators, but the technology of 2008 had its limitations. Despite their best efforts, the images remained too grainy to provide definitive identification of the suspects. The pattern of attempted withdrawals continued for several days, with Eve's credit cards being used at multiple ATMs throughout the city. Most of these machines were not equipped with surveillance cameras, making it impossible to gather additional visual evidence. However, the geographic pattern of the attempts provided investigators with valuable information about the movements and possible locations of the suspects. On March 7th, nearly 2 days after Eve's murder, her credit cards were used again, this time at a 24-hour convenience store in a neighboring town. When the transaction was declined due to insufficient funds in the account, police were immediately notified. Officers rushed to the location, hoping to catch the perpetrators in the act, but they arrived too late. However, this convenience store was equipped with a functioning security camera system. The footage from that night revealed another surprise. The person attempting to use Eve's credit card was not the same individual who had been captured at the first ATM. This discovery forced investigators to confront the possibility that Eve's murder had been committed by multiple perpetrators, or that her credit cards had been passed along to accomplices after her death. Like the previous surveillance footage, the images from the convenience store were too grainy to provide definitive identification. However, police made the decision to release both sets of images to the public, hoping that someone in the community might recognize the suspects and provide the break-the-case desperately needed. The response from the public was immediate and overwhelming. The police station was flooded with tips, calls, and potential leads as citizens studied the released images and tried to identify the suspects. Every call was investigated, every tip was followed up on, but none of the leads brought police any closer to making an arrest. Everything changed on March 12th when an anonymous caller contacted the police with information that would finally break the case wide open. The caller claimed to recognize the man in the second surveillance video, the one from the convenience store, and provided a name: Dario Atwater. When investigators began looking into Atwater's background, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of criminal behavior. Despite being only 21 years old, Dario had already compiled an extensive criminal record that included multiple arrests for robbery, assault, drug offenses, and weapons violations. He had served time in jail on several occasions, but had also been granted early release, allowing him to continue his pattern of criminal behavior. Perhaps most significantly, detectives discovered that just 2 days after Eve's murder, Dario had been scheduled to appear in court for violating his probation by carrying a handgun. This detail suggested that he had been armed during the time period when Eve was killed, supporting the theory that he might have been involved in her murder. When investigators compared old booking photos of Dario with the surveillance footage from the convenience store, the resemblance was striking. While the image quality wasn't perfect, there were enough similarities to convince police that they had identified at least one of Eve's killers. Armed with probable cause, detectives went to Dario's residence to bring him in for questioning. When confronted with the evidence against him, Dario denied any involvement in Eve's murder. However, the surveillance footage was compelling enough to justify his arrest, and he was taken into custody while the investigation continued. As police dug deeper into Diario's life and associates, they discovered that he frequently communicated with a 17-year-old named Lawrence Lovevet. Despite his young age, Lawrence had already established his own criminal record, suggesting that he was following a similar path to his older associate. When detectives examined Lawrence's booking photos and compared them to the surveillance footage from the first ATM, the one showing someone driving Eve's car, they made another crucial identification. The young man captured on camera appeared to be Lawrence, meaning that both suspects had now been visually connected to the crime. Unlike Diario, who had been arrested without incident, Lawrence proved to be more resistant when police came to apprehend him. He barricaded himself inside his home, forcing law enforcement to call in a SWAT team to safely extract him. When he was finally taken into custody, Lawrence also denied any involvement in Eve's murder, maintaining his innocence despite the evidence against him. With both suspects in custody, but neither willing to cooperate, investigators turned to other forms of evidence to build their case. Cell phone records proved particularly valuable, revealing that on the night of Eve's murder, both Diario's and Lawrence's phones had connected to a cell tower near her neighborhood, despite the fact that both suspects lived in a different part of the city entirely. This evidence supported the theory that Diario and Lawrence had traveled to Eve's area specifically to commit crimes, randomly selecting her as their target when they noticed she was home alone late at night. The fact that they had traveled so far from their own neighborhood suggested that this was a planned criminal expedition rather than a crime of opportunity. Based on the pattern of ATM withdrawals and the timeline of events, investigators reconstructed what they believed had happened during those horrific hours. After breaking into Eve's home and forcing her to accompany them, the suspects had driven to multiple ATM locations, compelling her to provide her PIN and access her accounts. After reaching the daily withdrawal limit of $700, they had taken her to a wooded area on the outskirts of town, where they ultimately ended her life. The brutality and premeditation evident in the crime prompted prosecutors to announce their intention to seek the death penalty for Diario. However, Lawrence's case was more complicated due to his status as a minor at the time of the crime. While he faced the possibility of life imprisonment, he could not be sentenced to death under existing laws regarding juvenile offenders. Recognizing that the evidence against both suspects was strong but not necessarily overwhelming, prosecutors made a strategic decision. They offered Diario a plea bargain. In exchange for pleading guilty and providing a full confession detailing the events of that night, the death penalty would be removed from consideration. After weighing his options and consulting with his attorney, Diario accepted the plea agreement. His confession provided the missing pieces that investigators had been seeking, painting a complete and horrifying picture of Eve's final hours. According to Diario's statement, he and Lawrence had set out that night with the explicit intention of committing robberies to make quick money. Lawrence had suggested targeting someone on or near the university campus, reasoning that college students might have access to cash and valuable items. As they drove through Eve's neighborhood, they spotted her through a window of her house, sitting alone and apparently studying. Armed with handguns, the two young men broke into Eve's home and forced her at gunpoint to accompany them in her own car. They then embarked on a nightmarish journey to multiple ATM locations, compelling Eve to withdraw money from her accounts while she pleaded for her life. Throughout the ordeal, Eve tried desperately to appeal to whatever humanity might exist in her captors. She begged them to let her go, promising that she wouldn't report the robbery to police. She just wanted to return home safely and continue with her studies and her plans for the future. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. Perhaps the most heartbreaking detail of Diario's confession was Eve's final request. As her attackers prepared to kill her, knowing that she had seen their faces and could identify them to police, Eve asked if they could pray together. Instead of showing any mercy or recognizing the humanity of their victim, the two men coldly shot her multiple times with both of their weapons. In April 2010, nearly 2 years after Eve's murder, Diario was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 30 years. Thanks to his plea agreement, he avoided the death penalty, but he would never again walk free. During the sentencing hearing, He turned to Eve's parents and apologized for his actions, acknowledging that he deserved the punishment he was receiving. Lawrence, who had refused to accept a plea bargain, went to trial in December 2011. Despite his attorney's efforts to establish reasonable doubt, Diario's detailed confession, combined with the physical evidence, proved overwhelming. Lawrence was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. However, Lawrence's story didn't end there. In 2013, the State Court of Appeals overturned his sentence, citing a separate legal ruling that had determined life imprisonment without the possibility of parole was unconstitutionally harsh for juvenile offenders. Lawrence was granted a new trial, providing him with another opportunity to escape full accountability for his crimes. During his second trial, Lawrence was more vocal in his own defense, telling the court that everyone makes mistakes and insisting that he wasn't the monster that people believed him to be. However, his words rang hollow to those who remembered Eve and the promise that had been cut short by his actions. Despite his protests, the judge again sentenced him to life in prison, ensuring that he would pay for his crimes for the rest of his life. Investigators also suspected Lawrence's involvement in another eerily similar case. In January 2008, just months before Eve's murder, a 29-year-old student had been killed in his apartment during a break-in, and money had subsequently been withdrawn from the victim's accounts at various ATMs throughout the city. However, authorities were never able to gather sufficient evidence to link Lawrence to this earlier crime, and the charges were eventually dropped. Eve's murder not only captured national attention, but also inspired meaningful legislative change. In response to the tragedy, North Carolina legislators enacted new laws that introduced harsher penalties and more rigorous procedures for individuals involved in gang-related offenses. The legislation, which took effect on December 1st and applied to all crimes committed from that date forward, was directly inspired by the need to prevent future tragedies like the one that had claimed Eve's life. At the University of North Carolina, Eve's memory was preserved through the establishment of a scholarship in her honor and the creation of a memorial garden on campus. These tributes ensured that future generations of students would know about the remarkable young woman whose life had been dedicated to service and whose death had sparked important changes in criminal justice policy. In a touching footnote to Eve's story, one of her close friends became a finalist on American Idol in February 2009. During his performance on the show, he shared how Eve's death had motivated him to take chances and pursue his dreams. He explained that without Eve's inspiration and the perspective her tragic death had given him about the fragility of life, he never would have found the courage to audition for the show. As both Diario Atwater and Lawrence Lovett began serving their life sentences, there was a sense that justice had finally been served for Eve Carson. While nothing could bring back the brilliant young woman whose life had been so cruelly cut short, the community could take some comfort in knowing that her killers would never again have the opportunity to destroy another family or cut short another promising life. The case serves as a sobering reminder of how random violence can shatter the most carefully laid plans and destroy the most promising futures. Eve Carson had done everything right. She had studied hard, served her community, planned for her future, and surrounded herself with loving friends and family. Yet none of that could protect her from two predators who saw her not as a human being with hopes and dreams, but simply as an opportunity to make quick money. In the end, Eve's legacy lives on not just in the lives she touched during her 22 years, but in the changes her death inspired and the scholarship recipients who will carry forward her commitment to service and excellence. While Diario Atwater and Lawrence Lovett will spend the rest of their lives paying for their crimes, Eve's impact on the world continues to grow, proving that even in death, goodness can triumph over evil. Justice was served, but the real victory lies in ensuring that Eve Carson's story continues to inspire others to live with the same passion, dedication, and commitment to others that defined her remarkable but tragically brief life. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you haven't already, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We upload new true crime content daily, covering cases you know and many you don't. Stick with us as we bring you more stories that deserve to be heard. See you in the next video.